I'm real excited for today. I just welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us for our very first town hall meeting. We're calling Midday with Minta. And this week's guest is Jake Roberson. He is the Director of Communication for the National Center on Sexual Exploitation. The National Center on Sexual Exploitation is the leading national organization exposing links between all forms of sexual exploitation, such as child abuse, prostitution, sex trafficking, and the public health crisis of pornography. Their mission is to defend human dignity and to oppose sexual exploitation. Jake, I'm so glad to have you here with us today. Thanks for being here all the way from Colorado.
That's right. Glad to be here with you as well, getting to talk about these important topics. I think it's easy for them to kind of get put in the back burner at times like this when, unfortunately, people are at even more risk during times of crisis.
Well, yeah, I agree. I mean, and I want to touch a little bit on that today as well. I have to say I'm a big fan of the National Center. My husband and I have been supporters of the organization for several years, really appreciate all the work that's done there. But I have to ask, so kind of getting back to that, during this time of being in a pandemic, tell me what about social media has become more dangerous for our kids?
So unfortunately, during this time, for our kids in particular, we know over the last couple of years, there's already been increasing amounts of online sexual exploitation where kids are being targeted and groomed via online platforms, social media apps in particular, even video game platforms with online features where these predators are finding that these systems that kids are using to connect with each other, to have fun virtually, have very limited and or completely unusable safety features, and these children are easily able to be targeted by these predators and groomed. And so they'll pose as, a friend, or not a friend, but they'll pose as, maybe a student from a nearby school or town, and they'll start to connect with the child via direct messaging on these platforms and building trust, and ultimately sowing seeds of distrust with authority figures in their life, and then eventually, as they've groomed them, ask for sexually explicit material, images, videos, and the like, and then use that material to blackmail the child into creating more of that content that can then be distributed via the dark web and child sexual abuse material, dark back alleys virtually, as well as then moving the exploitation, the trafficking into the physical reality of the child. And so through this pandemic, now that so many more children are spending time at home online as parents are working, and just there's a lot of downtime to fill as kids are inside, they're spending more and more time. And so the FBI, governments across the world are warning that these kids are at increased risk because of this extra time. So essentially there's more supply to meet the destructive and exploitative demand right now.
Wow, that's really tragic. It's a really sad reality of what we're dealing with during this time. One of my favorite things that the National Center does is the Dirty Dozen list. We as an organization here at New Life, we love to see that come out every year. We love to also kind of keep an eye on what the company's responses are to being on that list. Tell our participants kind of a little bit more about what that list is and your recent success with TikTok. And I hear a kiddo there, so do what you got to do.
We've got, I've got 4 kids here in my house, my wife and I, that we're homeschooling right now, so we're right in the thick of it. Fortunately for me, none of them are interested in TikTok right now, so that's a small blessing. Yeah. So TikTok, a lot of people have maybe heard about because it's really growing really fast. It's probably, it's one of, if not the fastest growing social media app for minors in particular. A lot of people have heard about it because it's a Chinese-based company that owns it, and so there have been concerns about just user security from like sort of a national security aspect. But for minor users, TikTok had really woefully inadequate safety features. The limited amount of safety features that parents were able to install and put in place on TikTok would actually automatically expire after 30 days, like for no reason, like no discernible reason. So even the parent that was trying to be proactive and responsible had a monumental task of trying to continue to put these safety features. There was no way to block or turn off direct messaging for minors. And so there was just a lot of concerns about the way this platform could be used to target children for grooming and exploitation. So we added TikTok to the 2020 Dirty Dozen list, and hundreds of advocates sent hundreds of messages to their executives, letting them know that this type of problem could not stand and that this was irresponsible. And within a couple of weeks of that announcement and of that advocacy, TikTok came out and said, we're introducing our family safety mode, and that'll have family pairing so that parents can actually have be paired have their TikTok account paired with their kids, and they can manage more parental controls. Will help you customize and make direct messaging safer by allowing you to turn it off entirely for your younger kids, or to only open it up to the people that, kids, friends who you know in person. Will allow you to, we're going to take away this automatic disappearing time limit of 30 days. Now these features are there as long as you, the parent, want them there. And so there's been some really encouraging movement from TikTok on this space. They're still not 100% there. There's still a few things we're asking them for, but some really significant improvements that parents can be happy about and implement for their kids.
That's awesome. That's awesome. If you would just take a minute, and not everybody's familiar with the Dirty Dozen list as we are here in the office. Share a little bit with us about that Dirty Dozen list.
Definitely. So, as you've mentioned, one of our core tenets is helping people understand how interconnected all forms of sexual exploitation really are. And one thing that people notice and we see, but only kind of process subconsciously, is how influential corporations are in shaping our culture and shaping the way we live and act, and in providing avenues, unfortunately, for sexual exploitation in different forms. And that in a lot of ways that there are not adequate means of accountability for these corporations to be held responsible for the ways that they either knowingly or inadvertently are facilitating sexual exploitation. And so we started putting together the Dirty Dozen list year after year so that we could help put a spotlight on some of these major corporations that have significant problems, some that they're aware of and others that they're not. So, and then spreading awareness to the general public, and then allowing you, me, anyone as a citizen of the United States and around the world to have a voice and to directly connect with these decision makers at these companies, letting them know what the issues are and publicly saying these need to be addressed. And we've seen some really significant results come about from Google, from Netflix, from Hilton Hotels, and more as a result of people being able to understand the issue, know what the problems are, advocate those directly to the corporations, and say, we're not going to stand for this anymore.
Yeah, it's been a great tool. I am interested, as you kind of talk about some of those successes, if you would expand a little bit for us on those. Like, I think with Hilton, they made the online pornography in the room not accessible. I mean, it's not a thing for the hotel chain anymore. Am I correct? Right. So tell us about the other ones with Google and the others that you mentioned. What was the leading factor that got solved through y'all's work?
Sure. So like with Google in particular, we actually just had another victory with them in regards to Google Images. So there's many different problems, some that are still needing to be addressed, such as Google Chromebooks being put into schools without any sort of safety features installed on them, and so kids being at increased risk there that we're still getting people to advocate on. But with Google Images, we've actually had a couple of important victories. In 2018, we got Google to agree to make Safe Search a prominently featured option for people in Google Images. It used to be kind of buried and was hard for people to find, and so they would just be getting unfiltered pornographic results in every search, and it was hard for people to even know that Safe Search was an option. And so they made it prominent at the top of Google Images. We're still advocating that that be a default setting. But recently, after being named to the 2019-2020 list, Google has now updated. One of their other issues was that if a child searched on educational terms related to the human body, or different types of people that they were looking for, like really graphic, hardcore pornographic images would populate on those search results, innocent search results. And for a while, Google hemmed and hawed and said, "Oh, we can't really do anything about it." Within the last couple of weeks, as we've been continuing to work with them and advocates have been continuing to talk to them, they've come back and said, "Okay, we're going to go to these educational search terms and we're going to make sure that this hardcore pornographic content isn't showing up accidentally as much as we can control for these kids. We're going to start to implement some filtering on our side." And so we're really encouraged that we're sort of seeing them being willing to take steps towards making their products safer for kids. Similarly, Netflix has had some really just almost completely unhelpful parental controls for years. And even when they have implemented better parental control features, they've been really user unfriendly and difficult to find and use for parents. And just within the last 2 weeks, they've announced publicly, sent out emails to their subscribers that, hey, we've actually now improved these. You can have not just account-wide parental controls, but profile-level parental controls. You can decide what rating of content is not accessible. You can filter out specific titles, and kids can't now just leave their profile and get into the parent's profile without using a password. So we're really excited about that as well.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. I mean, y'all's work, it's an example of how you're kind of changing the moral compass back to where it used to be. And so that's super impressive. Thank you for sharing all of that. Let me just kind of change directions a little bit. You and I had a little bit of a conversation about, a little bit about what we do, and our next endeavor is to open a home for boys. Now, the sexual exploitation of boys is just starting to get talked about more and more widely, I guess. And so tell us what the center has discovered about the exploitation of boys.
Yeah, so it's the biggest thing that people need to understand is how underrepresented this issue is, because the reality is that women and girls are on a percentage basis more vulnerable to sexual exploitation. Men and boys often get short shrift when it comes to any form of representation. And the research is showing that even if it's a smaller percentage comparatively to women, that there's actually a really high percentage of men and boys who are being victimized. In fact, some research has suggested as many as 1 in 6 men have experienced child sexual abuse in their lifetime. Like, that's a really, that's a significant part of the population. And we believe that's probably also under, an underestimation of the level of the problem, because research has also shown that boy victims of child sexual abuse face really high levels of mistrust when they report their abuse. And there's, similarly to the way there is for women, it manifests itself differently, that there's stigmas around reporting that, even for men, that make it difficult to fully understand the scope of the problem. And so a lot of men, similarly to women, are suffering in silence when they've experienced this type of abuse. And so we have a lot of work to do in regards to helping people be aware that this is a problem, and understanding how we need to address it differently, and what ways are the same and different when we address it with boys as opposed to when we address it with girls.
Very good. Thank you. Kind of going back to some of those online apps, you know, we've heard that a lot of boys, or that traffickers will lure boys in through like gaming apps such as Xbox and things like that. What do you know about that sort of thing?
Yeah, we actually just put out a story on this of, you know, a young 16-year-old boy who was playing, you know, these games, like when a lot of them offer natively inside themselves the ability to direct message with other players, as well as there's plenty of apps that allow them to live stream and direct message, such as Twitch and others. And so there's a lot of opportunities for spending a lot of time with these boys, the groomers can, and then just pretending to be their friend and pretending to be someone that they, you know, can just hang out with and feel safe with. And then they'll be like, well, you should come hang out with me. You know, they can learn a lot about these young boys in these platforms and figure out which ones are vulnerable and susceptible to then connecting with in real life and being trafficked. And like I said, we have this story of this young 16-year-old who it happened to him, and he went to travel to meet his online friend and, you know, further their relationship. Then he was trapped in a trailer with his traffickers as they continued to groom other boys and bring them and then put them out and prostitute them and traffic them sexually. So, you know, there's especially, again, as teen boys are spending more time in these spaces, they are more susceptible to these types of attacks.
What would you say to parents to be aware of?
Anytime we're giving our children permission to spend time virtually in places where they're connecting with people online, you know, that can be a really positive thing, but we have to understand how the parental controls work and how easily it is for strangers to access them. We can be aware of and talk to our kids about these issues. I think a lot of the problem is ignorance. We kind of just assume they're just talking to their friends, that's all. And so it really makes the case for parental involvement and conversations that are uncomfortable but need to happen, because if we're not the ones having them, you know, we're leaving our kids more vulnerable to these situations. So having the willingness as a parent to feel like, sometimes it's going to feel like we're the bad guy, sometimes it's going to feel like we're being intrusive, but this reality shows that we can't afford not to be involved in these platforms where our kids are connecting with others online.
Right. That's great advice. Great advice. I know that one of the things that we like to talk about too is really just encourage parents to talk to their kids about the tactics that traffickers use, because kids do get fooled thinking that this really is my friend. But if they just have a little bit of knowledge about what that situation looks like and the progression of that they normally use in their manipulation and what that looks like, then our kids are pretty smart and savvy. And we're all given that little bit of instinct of this, that something here just doesn't quite seem right. And that for them to never ignore that, but to really listen to that. But I mean, really, I do believe information is power, and giving that information to our kids they are our first line of defense. They're their own first line of defense.
Yeah. They, you know, if we don't equip them with the information, they need to be able to spot it and talk to us about it. Like, how are they supposed to know? You know, they don't, like, none of us are built with this inherent understanding. We need our parents to play that role in our lives.
One thing I didn't mention as we kind of started out, and I've got one more quick question for you, but I did want to let our audience know if you want to ask a question, there's a little chat bubble in the bottom. You can type your question in there for either myself or Jake. And we'd be happy to answer that in the next couple of minutes. I have one last question for you, Jake, and tell me, what is the center's greatest achievement in the realm of fighting for human dignity and opposing sexual exploitation?
Well, we talked about a few of them that we're really excited about, but one from just a couple of years ago was the passage of FOSTA SESTA. That's FOSTA SESTA. Those were some important legislation that passed through the House of Representatives at the federal level, as well as the Senate, that amended Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, that essentially gave full immunity to websites for knowingly facilitating and being complicit with online sex trafficking and prostitution. And so probably one of the most prominent examples of that was Backpage.com, which was a website that allowed for people to buy and sell directly with others. And in some way, there are certainly some people who are using it to sell their lawnmowers like people do on Craigslist. But Backpage.com in particular became notorious for allowing people to be trafficked for sex. And adults and minors, women and men, vulnerable people of all shapes and sizes and nationalities and races were being bought and sold for sex, were being sex trafficked essentially openly on Backpage.com. And there was, because of Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, there was no way that people couldn't bring a civil lawsuit against somebody like Backpage.com. And so because of FOSTA SESTA, this important legislation modified it so that these online platforms, like a website, social media apps, could be prosecuted, could face civil liability for knowingly facilitating prostitution and online sex trafficking through their platforms. And so that led to the takedown of Backpage.com and a significant reduction in the ability for traffickers to profit from the sale of human beings online. And that was a really significant victory. So we're very excited about that, proud to be a part of getting that through just within the last 2 or 3 years.
Yeah, that was super exciting to see the shutdown of Backpage. Very exciting. So I think right now, we got a few questions in the queue that we're going to go ahead and take. Tina, you can kind of feed those to me, or?
What is the greatest need that you see right now in the fight against child sex trafficking?
Is it for me or Jake?
Mr. Paul did not specify, so.
Okay, so we have a question. Well, I'll just ask it to you. What is the greatest need that you see right now in the fight against child sex trafficking?
I think right now, in this very moment, we have a really significant piece of legislation that's sitting in the United States Senate called the Earn It Act. And the Earn It Act is a really crucial piece of legislation that concerns Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, similar to the way that FOSTA SESTA did. And as of right now, there again are little to no options for us as U.S. consumers to bring any sort of civil accountability or liability to tech companies who have these lackluster safety features or none at all and are facilitating essentially predators giving them access to our children. And so the Earn It Act is designed to create a commission of tech experts and law enforcement officials and technology companies and federal officials and survivors, representatives of child sexual abuse, bringing them together to say, what are the best practices that we would recommend that tech companies adopt to better protect children from online sexual abuse and trafficking. And so this is a bipartisan bill. Republicans and Democrats have worked together through the Senate Judiciary Committee to put this forward. And this could be really significant in making the internet and making social media and video game platforms safer spaces for children. And so we're really encouraging folks to contact their elected officials and to let them know that they support the Earn It Act.
If you send me a link for that, we'll be happy to spread that through all of our social media platforms as well.
Absolutely. I'll send that to you.
Very good. All right, we have another question here. So Amazon, I figured out how to work my own chat so I can see my own questions now. Amazon is on the list, on the Dirty Dozen list. Have they done anything to clean up their company?
We are still waiting for any big movement from Amazon on these issues. We haven't had, the major breakthroughs with them the way we have with some of these other companies. And so that's why they've remained on the list and why they're one of our primary targets there, because they obviously have a massive footprint in the digital space. And we think they have a responsibility to do better in these spaces. And so we are hopeful. We've gotten a lot of advocacy going. We have had a few victories in that. One of the things we were calling them out for was facilitating the sale of childlike sex dolls on their platform. And while they still sell some sex dolls, and we think that's problematic, they have gone and removed many of the ones that are more childlike in appearance. And so that is a small victory that we've had with Amazon, thanks to advocacy from folks. So there have been those cracks of progress and opportunities. So that's why we're still moving forward with them, and we think that we can still make progress there.
Awesome. Another great work. Well, our time's about up. So, Jake, it's been great talking to you. Maybe you could just give us a quick, brief history. It's maybe a little late, but of the National Center, kind of how you guys got started.
Sure. So we started from concerned citizens deciding that they needed to take a stand back in the early 1960s when somebody essentially tried to exploit kids at a school in Manhattan by leaving pornographic material and targeting the school with pornographic material and exposing young kids to that. A group of concerned citizens, and in particular a couple of men and parishioners said, enough is enough. We think this is going to be a really big deal as this type of material becomes more widespread and accessible, particularly to kids. And so they ended up forming an organization called Morality in Media at the time. A lot of great work was done between the 1960s and the 1990s in that regard. And then as the organization sort of transitioned and the internet came along and the scope of the problem became much bigger and the understanding of the problem became much bigger. And the organization realized that this, as problematic as pornography is on its own, that it was connected into a bigger problem of sexual exploitation, and that in fact, sexual exploitation itself was an interconnected web of types of exploitation and abuse, and we wouldn't be able to effectively address any one of them if we weren't willing to see how they all connected into each other and address them as a whole. And so the National Center on Sexual Exploitation was born out of that understanding of we need to unite these different segments of people who are doing great work and say we can fight this problem better together.
All right. Well, we're glad it happened. We're glad you guys are out there doing the work you're doing, really having a huge impact on really the decency of society and media. And really, thanks so much for joining us today. Our time is up, and I do like to run on time. Tell your kids thanks so much for sharing you with us for this half hour. And it's been great to get to know you a little bit, Jake.
Absolutely. We appreciate you guys and the work you're doing on the front lines. It means the world to the movement. And so stay strong. We're grateful for you guys as well.
Thank you. God bless you.